Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In our final video from Astrology Day titled Honoring the Lineage, the Transmission of Astrology Through History, we're looking at astrology at the turn of the 20th century coming out of the underground, presented by highly esteemed astrologers Dr. Jenn Zahrt and Inga Thornell. And lastly, if you wish to view our current class, workshop and webinar offerings, please visit KeplerCollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Introducing our brilliant presenters, we have Dr. Jenn Zahrt, who is an author, publisher, and teacher of cultural astronomy and astrology. From 2017 to 2022, she was an honorary research fellow at the Sophia Centre for the Study of Cosmology in Culture at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. She is an emerita trustee of Kepler College and now serves on the board of directors for the International Society of Astrological Research. Dr. Zahrt founded the Celestial Arts Education Library in 2021 and creates an incredible over 10,000 volumes of astrology books, journals, and newsletters. And please support this wonderful endeavor by going to kaylee.institute, and I believe that's supposed to say .com, and on to you, Donna.
I'm introducing Inga Duncan-Thornell. She's a graduate from Kepler College from when we had our degree program and majored with a minor in mythology. She had a BA in East-West Studies. Then she carried on to study with Nick Campion at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, in the Cultural Astronomy and Astrology program, I believe. Jen was a part of that program as well. Inga's goal is to help her clients to better understand and constructively utilize the planetary energies in their lives by recognizing them within themselves and others, and to invoke their powers at will. You can visit her at dunther.com. And you can also find Inga teaching consulting, introduction to counseling and history at Kepler College. And we'll add that Jen also teaches, she's on our faculty, teaching in the fundamental certificate, the third course in the fundamental certificate this term.
So Jen and I will be talking about some of the major influences on Western astrology at the turn of the 20th century. And thank you, Kepler family, and all of you who are spending this time with us. This has been really fun so far. So I wanted to start with Evangeline Adams. She's America's first astrological superstar, is how she's usually described. She was an American astrologer with a clientele of nearly 100,000 clients, including the Prince of Wales, Mary Garden, J.P. Morgan, and Enrico Caruso. When she moved to New York City in 1899, she took rooms in a hotel. She warned the hotel owner of danger, and the following day, on 17 March, the hotel had a bad fire in which there were several deaths. The newspapers picked up on the story, and she became the most renowned astrologer of her era. She had a radio show. She was arrested, tried, and acquitted of fortune-telling in New York. She had thousands of subscribers to her astrological newsletter. And unfortunately, they followed her advice in investing in stocks during the run-up to the stock market crash of 1929. So no one's always correct, right? Aleister Crowley ghostwrote her books on astrology. And she's also a known acknowledged contributor to Crowley's own astrological text, The General Practice of Astrology. So she had a funny story that told about her very conservative upbringing in Boston. And she said one of her early clients was a prostitute. And she was so prostrate after this session that she says I wasn't myself for weeks. I have the same reaction even now on a less violent scale. So strong moral code, strongly conservative, and pretty funny considering that people's expectation of who would be visiting astrologers were mostly, prostitutes and other fortune tellers, and that was not her experience and her clientele. That was a shock to her. Another innovation during this period was sun sign astrology. So this is the form of astrology most commonly found in newspaper and magazine columns. It's a simplified system of astrology which considers the position of the sun at birth, and then makes all prognostications based on putting the sun on the ascendant and using the houses where the other planets are. So Astrologer R.H. Naylor in England was claimed by his newspaper to have predicted the crash of the R-101 airship, and this led to pressure on him to come up with a simplified system of astrology suitable for a newspaper column. After much experimentation, he decided on sun signs. So he developed this system, wrote a book about it, and was a regular feature. And we're all familiar with sun sign astrology. Another influence. So Pluto was discovered. And even though once it was considered the 9th planet, it's now the largest member of the Kuiper Belt and best known of a new class of worlds called dwarf planets. But you can see from the meanings of Pluto that we all use that the outer planets tend to derive their astrological meanings from the cultural milieu people were experiencing at the time, rather than from gods and goddesses. So this was a time when World War I had ended, culminating in the 1918 flu epidemic. The stock market had crashed, leaving many out of work and out of money. The Great Depression began, forcing social change, and to many, what seemed to be a death of the old ways. The seeds of World War II were already brewing, with a rise in nationalism in most countries. So this was a very turbulent time, and you can see how Pluto takes a lot of its meanings from what was going on, rather than from the god himself. Yeah? Oh, shoot. Oh, no. I have a recording going. That's not going to work. Uh-oh. Ah!
I think you're okay, Inga.
Okay, can you not hear it?
Is there a video
Oh.
playing on that image?
There's an audio playing on the image. I don't know why, and I don't know how to turn it off. If you can't
Oh,
hear
I
it,
can't
that's
hear it.
great.
Oh, we can't
Wonderful.
hear it.
Okay. So Jen and I wanted to emphasize one of the primary influences on Western astrology in the late 19th and early 20th century. Those who came to astrology later after the modern translations and started with traditional really don't tend to be aware and underestimate the influence of the Theosophical Society. But its influence is huge, and it's still a big part of astrology. So the Society's seal incorporates the swastika, the Star of David, the Ankh, the Om, the Ouroboros symbols. What their overarching vision was a pan-religion, a foundational religion that all other religions were born from and were limits of. What they actually did was enable Eastern religion to become part of Western culture and jargon. So Vedic astrology became a thing and became so well mended with Western that we can't even remember when we didn't use nodes for past lives. They were the catalysts for yoga to be built into a complete system.
They created an institutional infrastructure.
Yes.
And so I think, and the other thing about their role in this time is people created things opposing them as much as they created things with them. And so by pushing back against Theosophists, you get this other blossoming of astrological publication and gathering saying, we're not like those guys,
Right.
So they threw down a gauntlet in their lumping. I mean, even this logo is like, wow,
everything. It's everything.
Let's put a little more in there,
Yeah.
like let's get some aspects and, but all of that lumping caused a backlash as well as a galvanization for them. So, we can't, as much as we might go, oh yeah, that doesn't seem like it's a good practice to just stick everything in there. Like, what about just astrology and just yoga and just this? But it allowed other people to have that reaction and make culture.
And Fabianism and early socialism, and helping India to become a nation, all this stuff they were involved in. So the founder of Theosophy is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And she was an interesting person. Can you hear that audio? I hope not.
We cannot, unfortunately.
Good. I'm glad. Okay. So she was really interesting. There's a great book if you want to read a non-theosophical approach to her. It's called Madame Blavatsky's Baboon, and it's by Peter Washington. It's great. But her major work was The Secret Doctrine, and this became a foundational contribution to modern esoteric philosophy. So she channeled a lot of this, and then other people put it into actually readable form for her. So she set herself two goals. The first was to recover what she considered to be the lost wisdom of a once universal human civilization by bringing together its surviving fragments from Indian, Platonic, Hermetic, and Kabbalistic thought. The second was to form a body of people who, by studying and practicing the ancient wisdom, could prepare the world for the imminent shift into a new historical era. So very different. She draws on everything, kind of puts it all together into a format, along with various occult and esoteric information. So her co-founder was Colonel Henry Alcott, and he was an American. It was a Civil War, and his father was a businessman, and he founded an agricultural school, wrote a book on growing types of Chinese and African sugarcane, became the agricultural correspondent for the New York Tribune, and became a spiritualist. That was his one kind of aberration from conservative American. So he met with Blavatsky, and they started the Theosophical Society in New York. So Theosophy in many ways was enabled by the spiritualist movement that had already begun in the US. Alan Leo, probably one of the best known Theosophists. He was a devout Theosophist, worked many of its religious concepts, such as karma and reincarnation, into his astrology. This is how it enters Western astrology.
Inga, would you say he created esoteric astrology? Would he be like the guy?
I would probably give that more to Bailey.
Okay.
But he's the one who did add it to his books that people heard of it in. But she's probably the one who did the most work with Christian esotericism.
Did she inspire him then in that way to go that direction?
That could be.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be. We don't really have much information on where they intersected.
Mm.
What we do know is that he was an influence on Gustav Holst's work, The Planets, because his book on the art of synthesis, he gives planetary descriptions, many of which are exactly what Holst used.
And he was a traveling salesman, so he had that kind of marketing finesse.
He absolutely was.
Can I just pipe in for a second?
Please.
I want to hijack, but I do know that
please.
Alan Leo's Esoteric Astrology, the text, arises from his time in India, talking supposedly with Brahmin astrologers, although the text, when you read it, and if you know Indian astrology, they don't match up at all. So I don't know if someone was pulling his leg. There's reports that he was perceived as very arrogant by the Indians that he was like staying with and stuff like that. So they may have just fed him a bunch of BS. But that's the Alice Bailey's channeling of Dwal Kul. That's a completely different stream than Alan Leo's coming up with his thing.
So we
That's all.
don't.
But you bring up a good point, though.
Probably
of his
brought
visit.
the idea for his cookbook reports from the Indian Nadi system. But he doesn't give it credit anywhere. Have you noticed?
No.
Yeah, but he did reports. So he printed mail order reports. He had a whole warehouse full of what they used to call lady typists, secretaries on typewriters, typing reports and mailing them out. In 1914, aged 54, which would have been a 7th house perfection, with Pisces Jupiter in the 12th, Leo faced prosecution against the charge that he did unlawfully pretend to tell fortunes through astrology. The case was eventually dismissed for lack of evidence, but it's taking over, it's on its own, marvelous. It led to Leo's belief that astrology needed to be revised in order to be legitimized. So again, like sun sign astrology, he simplified a form of astrology. by doing these reports and not doing prediction. So the anti-fatalism, the kind of positivity of modern astrology, you could, in a lot of ways, ascribe to Ellen Leo. So Annie Besant was a British social reformer, Fabian socialist, theosophist, and an Indian independence leader. She wrote an introduction to yoga and gave a series of lectures intended to give an outline of yoga to prepare the student to take it up for practical purposes. She was the wife of an Anglican clergyman who was separated and spent a lot of her time in India, founding a school for girls. What do you know about her, Ken? How do they think of her there?
I was muted, so you didn't hear me laughing out loud.
Yes, I figured you'd be laughing. Yes.
No, I'll just, no comment.
But
I mean, the
another one of
theosophists,
these English people coming over and restating ancient, religions and thoughts as their own.
I'm remembered when I was a freshman in college and I was taking a World Religions East class. And after the lecture, I can't remember if it was like introducing Hinduism or Buddhism, but it was definitely Indian religions. I went up to the professor and I was like, wow, this sounds a lot like theosophy, which I had been, studying in my teenage years. And he was like, no, you got it wrong. Theosophy borrowed from these traditions.
Yes.
And that was my first
perfect.
awareness of like the importance of historical transmission.
And then you got your MA at Kepler.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So these were the theosophists. Yeah.
The lumpers.
Yes, exactly.
colonialism,
And
exactly.
restaters. It really is colonialism at its kind of purest. Yes. So Ledbetter brought in the idea of, he was an Anglican, he was a priest, Church of England, and became a spiritualist. And he was really another thread of this Christian esotericism, combining Christianity with, the ideas of Buddhism. And it's peculiar stuff. He had a bad scandal with, young boys. And the only one who stood up for him was Besant, who saw him as a martyr who was wronged by the Theosophical Society. And he stayed with the society for a very, very long time. But he was a big promulgator of bringing the Christianity in, as was Alice Bailey. So she kind of represents the Western camp of theosophy. She was less interested in the Indian material and went whole hog on the Christian esoteric. The thing to remember when reading Bailey is she's a former Sunday school teacher, and her missionary spirit really comes through. She and Steiner popularized the idea of the New Age. So she talks about a spirit of religion and its ultimate root, and Christianity bringing over the ultimate root from all other world religions. She also talks about healing, and healing consisting of releasing the soul, that is the establishing of a right relation between the soul and the personality, where the personality is defined as the instrument of soul expression. So you'll see in her a lot of what we've come to hear again and again and again from Louise Hay, Carolyn Myss, that whole school of thought going on still currently. But that came out first in Alice Bailey. Rudolf Steiner founded Anthroposophy. He was head of the German section of the Theosophists, and I'm sure Jen will talk more about him when she gets to her slides. So I'm not going to cover him.
I got some drama.
Yeah, he was appointed by Annie Besant to be the leader of an esoteric school, and he is the founder of the Waldorf schools, which still exist. And some of the temperament work with astrology came from Waldorf schools. Another is Dane Rudger. So all these people you've heard of, but they were all, this is the link between them, is that they are all theosophists. So he published books on a wide variety of subjects, ranging from psychology to astrology. They're all available for free online. He published a biography of the composer Debussy and Slides are moving on their own. And he also composed serious orchestral music, mostly avant-garde. His ideas that come from theosophy are the inherent idea of the evolution of the soul through the signs and the evolution of the moon through its phases. One of the hallmarks of theosophy is this idea of personal evolution, that we're here to evolve. So Vivian Robeson. He has BSc, Bachelor of Science, behind his name on every book he wrote. He also said that he was the British curator of geology and paleontology in the British Museum, which he was not. He might have been a librarian, but we have very, very little information about him. Most of it's wrong. He wrote a lot of books that are really good, though, and this Astrology and Sex is really fantastic. It's one of my favorites.
I love the indeterminacy of his bio.
Yes.
Like, we can only aspire to that kind of mythology, right?
Yeah. And this is someone where if you look at the chart and he's got like a stellium in Gemini. So it's really interesting that he just made up all of these different stories about himself.
Yeah.
And we don't really have any real bio. But he was the co-editor of Alan Leo's Modern Astrology with Bessie Leo, Alan's wife, as his editing partner. So this is the Theosophical Society as it still stands in Wheaton, Illinois. What they teach there, they have a lot of lectures. They have these dinners, these great vegetarian dinners, and you listen to astrology lectures and lectures on New Age millenarianism under a giant portrait of Helena Blavatsky on the wall in this beautiful kind of Gothic arts and crafts building. All the original furniture. They have 150 branches nationwide, and any imprint that has Quest books on your bookshelf is Theosophical Publishing House. So they promulgated a lot of the material that we have. And I can tell which books that I got from there because still 40 years later, they still smell like Nag Champa when you open them. But it was a fun place to hang out. So they've sold books on all these different topics, development to creativity, and very interesting. And like I say, they're still around. Visit them if you're ever in Illinois. There's another in New York. So I'll hand this over to Jen to discuss what was going on in Germany.
All right. I'm going to take it away, Inga.
Yeah.
Okay. The
And,
German
I didn't
revival.
go over time. My goodness.
What's that?
I didn't go over time. Whew.
Yeah. So here we are. Thanks everyone for sticking around and listening to something that I feel like no one ever wants to hear about, because German history like inevitably lands in astrology land in two camps, Hitler or Jung. And we're not talking about either of those people because they've taken up enough air, right? Jung with his Leo breathes, you mentioned his name and like all the air goes out of the room. So I want you to park what you think you know about astrology in Germany in this part of the century, because there's been a distortion when we get process psychology and people emphasize how Jung was getting into astrology in 1911 and working with Freud, and then it influenced some of his Black Book work, which Sophia Center Press has published an article about by Liz Green, and then she dominates the publishing landscape for quite some years and makes it seem like Jung was a big player in the astrological community, when in fact he was closeted the entire time. He didn't make a publication, like an overt public publication about astrology, until after the Second World War. So what was actually happening with the revival of astrology in Germany? Let's find out. So at the turn of the century, look at these two book dates, 1898, 1899. There was a man named Albert Kneip who was in Hamburg, who was a journalist and a publisher and philosopher. And he was going back to the original astrological sources that they had at the time. There was a German translation of Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. He was looking at Firmicus Maternus's Mathesis, and any of those older sources that we now currently are obsessed with in the traditional revival today. And he was thinking to himself, you know what, I'm going to pick up where Kepler left off, and I'm going to not pay attention to what's going on with this, introduction of other types of modern approaches to making astrology a characterological thing, like a diagnostic saying, this is your character, your personality. And I'm going to strip it down to what I think are the more scientific technical basis of this, right? So he was looking at declination, he was trying to understand primary directions, and then he did something that really changed the history of 20th century astrology. He resuscitated from Bonatti a passage about what inspired Alfred Witte to come up with midpoints and revisit midpoints again. So this is like sort of from Bonatti to Albert Knife's brain to the classroom to Hamburg School Astrology. So this is sort of like, and this is you'll see like one of the texts about this is all about, Elik Howe's history of astrology in World War II. He's emphasizing the theosophists, but this guy is actually pre-theosophical influence. He's not influenced by them at all. He's literally in those traditional sources. Okay, next. We're going to see the academics involved. So Franz Boll is a philologist. That's like, in Heidelberg, he's looking at the way language works and how it translates through different linguistic structures and cultural transfer and cultural history. He gets together with Karl Betzold, and Betzold himself is an Assyriologist. He's looking at ancient languages and trying to bring lexicons into reality. And they were looking at what were the people in Mesopotamia and Greece doing? Let's figure out that. So they published some technical manuals and some lexicons, but then they also published this book, which I have to say, like the graphic design of the book culture in this era is like so amazing. I just, it's very much fun to like hang out with these things. I have a few show and tells here too. So they published this book called Sternglaube und Sterndeutung in 1918, and it gets changed. There's a 1922 version. It just keeps getting added to. A guy comes in named Gundel who helps out or whatever. But this was one book that really did throw down the gauntlet. Now, the First World War has just ended. They come out and they say, people have looked up to the sky forever, and they start with the earliest sources they can find because these are scholars of Mesopotamia. These are scholars of Greek culture. So they're bringing us forward into sort of, understanding the contextual history of astrology, saying, don't throw it out. Actually, it's worth paying attention to because until 300 years ago, we've had it embedded in so many kinds of culture, and they demonstrate that. And then they read Goethe's horoscope. If you don't know anything about German literature, Goethe's like Shakespeare. So it's kind of like, you got to talk about his horoscope. He talked about his own horoscope, okay? So this was, a big benchmark in seeing, okay, they're going to read the German Shakespeare's horoscope. What are they going to say about it? This is the most incredible thing you'll ever hear. When they begin talking about his horoscope, the first thing they cite is Hermes Trismegistus. And then they talk about his parents. Why? I'm not sure why they go straight to trying to delineate his parents. But what they say is, well, look at the planet that's supposed to be representing his father and check out its term ruler. Because it's in the bounds of Mercury, his dad was going to be a lawyer and be a little bit persnickety and nitpicky. Are you kidding me? He's literally reading from Goethe's chart the nature of his father based off of the terms. This is coming from Dorotheus, and they say so in the book in 1918. And then they say, oh, his mom is in the terms of Jupiter in Jupiter's own sign, so she was very jovial, which we can prove because of XYZ. And they all know about his life and story because he's German Shakespeare, right? So I find it very fascinating that they're talking about Hermes, they're talking about Dorotheus, they go on to some Firmicus, they bring out Valens. And this is all, we have to remember, modern astrology didn't exist in 1918 in the same way, not in Germany. We don't have newspaper horoscopes until 1937, as Inga just showed, right? Like those types of popular publications for consuming astrology that have, been designed to sell magazines didn't exist. This was two scholars putting their heads together, trying to come up with, sharing the tradition. So that sent shockwaves through things, and Abby Warburg got involved. Who is Abby Warburg? So look at this forlorn guy. He was first in line to inherit his family's bank, but he loved books more than he loved money. And I kind of know what that feels like. So he ended up saying, hey, Max, my brother, this is not Max, that's Fritz Axel. But he told his brother, Max, hey, you're second in line, but I'll let you be the ruler or the king of the bank if you just buy me any books I want. And that was in 1909. And the brother goes to himself like, well, I mean, what's another couple like, I'm going to buy him some literature, like more Goethe, more copies of Kleist or Schiller. Like, sure, dude. Yeah, let me be the president of the bank and I'll give you all the books you want. Well, little did Max know that by the time Abby was done, he would have collected thousands and thousands and thousands of books. Okay, so in here, you see this reading room. Check it out. Look at the shape of the books on the wall. Can you see that curve? when they went, Fritz Saxel is the reason why Warburg Institute became an institute. Warburg went a little bit mad studying astrology, kind of like we all do when we really love it. So Saxel was like, get to your senses, man. He was 24 years younger than Warburg. He's like, let me help you make this a bit of a thing, right? So he creates an institute. They have enough money. Because the family was international, they were able to do banking in New York before the stock crashed and survive the German hyperinflation to keep buying Abbey books during this massive financial crisis in Germany that no one could escape except Warburg. So they built this massive, massive library. And he said, the reading room needs to be shaped like an ellipsis because I need you to circulate the books like a planet orbits the sun. So just planting a seed. I want to do that for Kaylee one day. Capital campaign, 10 years, 15 years from now, we're going to recreate this elliptical reading room. Anyway, here we go. It doesn't exist anymore because Nazis, but moving on, they were able to create a culture of research around focusing on the way that astrological images were translated across various cultures. Now, here's the pitfall. Abbie Warburg came from a time when people were still in that sense of like the colonialist evolutionary mode that the Theosophists were about. He wasn't in that stream, but he still didn't understand the concept that world cultures developed astrologies somewhat independent from each other, even though there was cultural transfer. Sometimes there's also the introduction of something brand new. And so he was imagining astrology to be like this entity that just kind of got born out of some random place in Mesopotamia and just traveled its way around Europe like this, accreting things to it and like losing other things. And he didn't have that idea of multiplicity that I think is now like standard for scholarship in astrology. So that's one of his weaknesses, is that he thinks astrology is just this one thing moving around getting different, but it's not that. And so this evolutionary concept hinders a bit what he can come up with as interpretations. But when you're studying the history of ideas, you have to follow the money. And the fact that he was able to create an institute that had a library that people could study allowed other people in the country to study. So he preserved these texts in a way that allowed them to produce the Warburg Institute in London, which produces PhDs like what Dorian Greenbaum has given us. So, I mean, this comes straight through to who we are now, right? This is a very important thing. So creating that institutional thing is one of Abbie Warburg's best gifts. His scholarship about astrology is also a little bit slanted. He wasn't interested in being an astrologer. He just liked the pretty pictures. I get it. I'm into that. But, you know, we have to also like see what we're looking at. Okay, next. This is where it gets sort of clippy. This guy, Alexander Bethor, was one of the first, according to Elik Howe, people who came from the middle classes or the upper classes in this early day. 1909, publishing Zodiacus, funded by his own income, and therefore it only lasted 4 years. So, but it was the first publication, the first journal. Look at that cute picture on the front. It was the first journal to truly treat astrology for astrologers and not include any occultism, right? So I think that's important to think about, because if you see this little like line below it, the first German publication for scientific astrology. If you want to read more about the development of scientific astrology, I wrote my MA at this University of Wales about it, but I want to move on. This guy. Wow. I want to tell you what Elik Howe says, he's a quick-witted rascal with a penchant for occultism. So this is the controversial theosophist and rabble-rouser who was, have you heard this word? It's a really cool word, amanuensis. He was an amanuensis for an English theosophist and traveled around with him, kind of like his little puppy. And he got that like wild hair, like, sit down, dog. And he was like a kind of, you know, swindling people a lot and making up names for himself and, you know, say, oh, send me some money and I'll send you a thing. And it wasn't even astrological at some point. But what he did do was he founded the Theosophical Publishing House in Leipzig, which ended up becoming the vehicle for the publication of technical literature that disseminated across Germany, and during the First World War, slowly but steadily created the conditions for people to do technical astrology so that after the war ended, they could gather and really put their pedal to the metal. So this guy was the reason why. Vollrath set up the infrastructure. Brandler-Procht put his foot on the gas. He was the guy who in 1905 actually had written a mathematical instructional textbook of astrology that got revised in 1921 and very much expanded. This you're looking at the expanded one. Actually, no, this might be the 1905 one because Max Altman's on there. Nevertheless, he wrote the first 5 volumes of the astrological Bibliothèque, which is the library of astrology books that eventually became 21 volumes. But in 1914, Brandler-Procht kind of got a clue that Fulrath was a bit of a crazy guy. So they split up. I mean, war helps too. But he ended up going on his own way and then just publishing anything and everything he could. And he had this interesting mix of scientific plus theosophical, right? So Brandler-Procht was seen as kind of a publicist of astrology, and he was a little dubious because people who were only wanting the hardcore scientific mathematical were a little bit upset that he kept injecting the popular theosophical in there, right? And so you have to, like, you know, think about those mixes of things. Like, he was able to actually just completely blow people's minds. He used fixed stars, he used Arabic parts, and, you know, he was just kind of creating astrological societies wherever he went. He was Austrian, you know, so he was able to go to Austria and Switzerland, Germany. He was just kind of like producing community through the publications, through the serialization, through journals, through societies, all of it, right? So Brandler-Procht is a man to know. But then we get to, we have to go to the Netherlands. It's really cool. This guy, his name is Rolf Takens. Oh, I spelled it wrong. R-O-E-L-F. A Dutch interlude. So he named himself a Ac Libra, Cancer, Aquarius, Libra, after factors in his chart. And he is a painter, a veterinarian, a dandy, a traveler. It's one of those weird things where you're like, oh my God, he's born on the same day as me in 1862. Oops, like, am I like this guy? You know, when you start doing the research and you're like, oh wow, like I travel, I'm an astrologer, I have a doctorate, not in veterinarian science, but you know, so it's like you think about these nuances, and I'd like to do art. Nevertheless, in Rolf's book, he was influenced into astrology from theosophy coming out of England, as Inga showed us, but he immediately went away from the HPB variety and into the Steiner variety. And then he also did this about face with his interest in astrological medicine. And so he takes into his text, this is the coolest thing you'll ever hear. He's teaching in this book the technical things. He talks about how to calculate a chart from scratch with the logarithms, using the ephemeris, line by line. He takes you through exactly what you need to do to make a chart. And then he says, and if you want to find out what's going to happen, let me teach you about annual perfections. Back in 1915. Right? That's insane. Like, we're having people still talk about perfections. Where did that go wrong? The same book at the very end, he goes, oh, well, and he talks about converse secondary progressions. Can you believe this? And so he goes, yeah, I included all that stuff for completion's sake because I didn't want to leave it out. You know, I wanted to cover all my bases, but I really recommend you just look at transits and secondary progressions, and don't even look at your solar return chart. It's no big deal. Don't look at don't look at converse progressions, no big deal. Annual perfections, no big deal. Like, let's just slim it down and keep it simple. And I'm going like, no, it was right there. All you had to do was not publish that last paragraph and people would be going nuts and we never would have lost it, right? The other thing to note about this book, the reason why I'm taking you to the Netherlands, but right back to Germany, is that it was published in 3 languages simultaneously. Because he was such a world traveler, the publisher was like, well, I mean, how many people live in the Netherlands? If we want to make money off this book, this guy's got friends in America, he's got friends in Germany, let's just publish it in both languages at the same time. So it went into at least 3 editions, and it became the main book in 1915. Once it came out, Elsbeth Ebertine turned her attention from Karl Brandler-Procht to Rolf Takens, and she like drove him really hard down the court. So this is my lady. Elsbeth Ebertine is Germany's most famous astrologer. And I love that Inga started her presentation with a woman. I would have done the same, but there are a few guys that came before her. But she was already active in astrology at 1911. She was also learning from the very first person I talked about, Kneipp. She was learning about midpoints. She was learning about all kinds of primary directions. She was learning about fixed stars. And so she had this really solid education from Kneipp in Hamburg. And she was also looking at mundane work, right? So how many, people do we know do mundane astrology in public who happen to also be, women? It's not very common. Usually it's this male-dominated sphere. She was predicting the death of Tsar Nicholas II to the accurate year and the accurate circumstance. So this happened, she said, in 1915 in a book called Royal Nativities. If the Tsar is able to survive the next 3 years without dying mysteriously, then he'll be fine. And in 3 years, he died mysteriously. So people were like, oh my God, she was right. And I'm like, well, that's not that specific, but it was still a printed prediction. So she ended up getting super famous, founding her own publication house. Here's her baby photo. I just have to say, so she was born to a family that did costumes. And so she was in this like world, one of 6 children, oldest of 6. And her dad went a little bit crazy. And so she ended up, and they literally locked him up into an insane asylum. And she would visit him there secretly, trying to like connect to her dad. And then she ended up having, like, they would make all these costumes for plays. And she ended up growing up knowing about all of the literature and all of the like sort of literary culture. So she made an early living writing about people's birthdays and death days. And then she later said this translated really well into her work as a writer, not for one, because people would want to publish something that's, du jour, like, oh my God, it's someone's birthday or death day. Yeah, of course I'll run that article. But then when she added astrology to the mix, it just completely mushroomed her career. So she started learning, she was a graphologist first, started learning astrology in 1911. And then during the war, she got very famous for her little publications. And then she began writing an almanac as of 1918 when the war ended for the next 20 years. And she continuously did research in medical astrology and fixed star astrology, mundane astrology. She wrote for popular people, and she made a movie. There's this book here. You can see it sort of the bottom, Mars in the House of Death. She made this into a screenplay that was filmed and premiered in Munich in 1925. The story is like a super drippy romance novel, but it's also got some death added in there because it's German. It's really kind of a thing. And I wanted to show you her logo for her publication here is Uranus, Regulus, Mars. And if you look at her natal chart, this is the German symbol for Uranus. Here's Regulus, and here's Mars. She drew this herself, by the way. So here we go. Can we stop talking about the Saska in the chat? That'd be really cool. Thanks. All right. So Witte was also learning from Kneipp at that time, and he went to war during that time. So Elsbeth was sitting around publishing in the war and predicting things in the war, but he was actually on the front. And I learned from Gary Kristen that because he was a topographer, he was able to actually get his, instead of being in the trenches in the mud, he was staying in a villa. So he had all of his astrology books with him, and he was able to kind of be a little bit cushy in there. And he was learning from Karl Brandler Procht and Alfred Kneipp, who we've just met. And so, he was trying to figure out why certain things, he would hear battles happen and sort of bombs go off, and he would try to figure out why they were going off, and like all of his little tiny technical geographical calculations weren't adding up. And he knew there was some chatter about there being a factor beyond Neptune. So he started tuning into it, and just kind of like getting in there and trying to feel out like what was going on. And so he ended up coming up with this calculation, inferring in the way that people were inferring Uranus and people that they inferred Neptune. He inferred a factor which he called Cupido. In 1913, he had published one article about astrology. After 1919, he published a lot of articles about astrology, trying to explain what the cosmology of the solar system is. I just gave a talk actually for Scott Silverman, who's here. Hi, Scott, about the cosmology of Witte's Trans-Neptunians. And so if you're a member of OPA, their free journal, the Career Astrologer will be coming out, or the Evolving Astrologer now, will be coming out with a detailed thing about that. But basically, the Trans-Neptunian planets rely upon a cosmology of the solar system that says the planet isn't just the thing you see, it's actually the orbit. It's a pretty complex idea, but it just kind of flips the idea of what a planet is inside out. And he was really bad at publicizing himself, right? So he just could not mount a good campaign for explaining this out of his own head, and it's remained untranslated for a long time. And even people who are working with these, they're like, they're energy factors. And it's like, but if you understand what his cosmology is, you don't have to say they're energy factors anymore. They're planets, according to the way he's thinking about what the solar system actually is, Okay, so he discovers 4 of these little guys. And then, because of the way that this book was put through, so there's 2 competing things. One, at this point, after the discovery of Pluto, which Inga also showed, you have this idea of like, well, Cupido is supposed to orbit the astronomical distance from Pluto. So that's a little bit like weird, because you can't have 2 planets in the same orbit. They'll smash, right? So now this gets into the zone of fake astrology. And there was a huge backlash from astrologers on the ground saying, oh my gosh, like you're making up fake planets. We're trying to be respectable. We're trying to be scientific and like Germanic and like, get this into the universities. What are you doing? You're going to make us look like fools. Now that we have Pluto, this is totally, made up. Don't do it. Well, 1933 happens. The Nazis take over. They go, okay, you've published this book now, 1936. They have 3,000 copies of this book. This is the version that actually is there. And they say, oh, you have fake astronomy in here. You can't publish this. We're going to burn it. So they do. But I actually just came across something yesterday that said another reason why it got banned or burned was because they had predictions in there for, illegitimate leaders. And then they also battles going bad and things like not happening the way you want them to. And so the regime was like, yeah, let's just get this out of people's hands, right? And again, logo of the publishing house, check it out. This is Witta's natal chart, right? So there you go. So that was the guy who sort of spurned the Hamburg School into existence. But again, like Warburg, didn't have the publicity talent or the interest or the capacity to make it publicized or fix it into an institute. So that's why we get Friedrich Sigrun, who founded the Kepler Circle in 1915 and through the war kept it going. In 1919, he was the one who invited Witte to give a talk. And Witte kind of stuck to it like glue, and he just stuck around. And then in Hamburg School, the Hamburg School Association of German Astrologers was created in 1925 at the behest of Sigrun. Sigrun was instrumental in developing the 90-degree wheel, or the dial, and he discovered Apollon, Admetos, Poseidon, and Vulcanus as well. So we have this idea. There's another source. So if we go back to Libra, Libra suggests that the higher octaves of Aries, or if we're going to feel like what the real ruler of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini is, he says the Aries ruler will probably be beyond Neptune, but Taurus and Gemini will be closer to the sun inside the orbit of Mercury. And then he says Vulcan, and then he says Pluto. So in his mind, Pluto orbits closest to the sun, which is like, oh my God, no. Okay. All right. So now we're at Reinhold. So if you remember, we saw a picture of Elsbeth here where she was with him. Right. So Reinhold, this was, one more. So Reinhold was not raised by Elsbeth. Come on, he was not raised by her. So Elsbeth divorced her husband after their second child died in a freak accident at 6 months old. So she did not stick around. It was very hard on the marriage. He was 10 years older than her and a teacher, and he never supported her independent work. And she was very much dedicated to her intellectual pursuits. And so she said, well, I'm not going to do this. So she divorces him. And the dad puts Reinhold in the care of the state. And I believe some grandparents might have been involved. But basically, he wasn't around her until this moment. This is in Reinhold's autobiography. And on July 14th, 1917, when he's emancipated, he meets her and he goes, Mom, what are you all about? She goes, I'm all about astrology. And he goes, okay, talk to me. And then he starts learning astrology from his mom from jump after not having any contact with her until he was about 17. So that was a huge deal. And so when we go forward, he publishes his first article about astrology in one of her journals in 1926, and then founds his own publishing house in competition with her, except she's showing him the ropes. So I think it was more of like she's like, I'm going to do my thing over here. You do it over there, kid. I'll show you what to do, but I don't want to mix what's going on. And he starts going in his own direction. He's obviously picking up midpoints. He's learning from Witte as well. And he decides that in order to survive the banning of the book, the rule book for planetary pictures, he's going to strip out the trans-Neptunians and some of the more complicated Hamburg School methods, simplify it, and publish it as the combination of stellar influences. Well, that caused a huge rift because the Hamburg School astrologers are going, wait, you just kind of took our system, watered it down, and made it popular under a different name and bypassed the censorship of the Nazis. Thanks. So there was a big rift that got developed in there. And then this is the first one, waterlogged, icky ick, but you can get an English translation here. Actually, if you did a search for the various covers of this book, it's like amazing. There's so many. He also, the thing behind this little background that changed, he and his mom came up with correspondences to parts of the body for every single degree of the zodiac on multiple levels, right? And then he also came up with all these graphical ephemerides. So if you look at that, you can go to astro.com and play with a bunch of them. And I just wanted to point out that throughout his whole life, he kind of looked at books the same way, because that's sort of cute, you know, already from like the 20s, and then a picture of him in older age. Okie dokie. So just a few more people. So what I said about Jung, right? When we're talking about Carl Jung's influence on astrological psychology or psychological astrology, we have to understand that he didn't publish anything about it, and there were other people who did. So we have, the movie of the Mars in the House of Death has been lost because Germans liked to do lots of world wars in their property. So nobody has a copy of it. I know it's really sad. If there had been a copy, I would have written my whole PhD thesis about it. So Olga von Ungern-Sternberg has the coolest name you'll ever hear. And she wrote this book called Die innerseelische Erfahrungswelt am Bilde der Astrologie, which is, in 1928, her publication of her perspectives on how to create an astrological psychology. How do we use astrology and psychology together? And I'm bringing this up because I want to show you the cover of the book has this medieval, it's not a circular chart image, it's very square, right? But we're talking about psychological approaches to astrology, which are very modern. And it's also a woman publishing, which is not common in that time. But she held her own. She lived to be 102. And she always was trying to bring the mythological and astrological, psychological together. Now, she knew of Jung, and she was active in those conversations in society at the time and was bringing him into the conversation, but she was the one publishing about it. And I feel like we need to give her credit for doing the work to put it together, because Jung wasn't doing that in public, right? So she needs to be restored to her own place in this, also because she lived a really long time and has a lot of other things to say outside of the scope of this presentation. And this guy, Oscar A.H. Schmitz, was a very well-known author and considered a sort of a flaneur or a dandy. He was born in Frankfurt and then had an inheritance. And so he kind of did that thing that guys do in the 19th century and 20th century. He just bopped around, entertaining himself, going on trips, having salons, all of these types of things. Got involved with lots of the famous people of the day. And am I over time? Oh, okay, no, you're just up there. Okay, I saw your face. Okay.
Oh, you're good. I just carry on.
This is the last slide. It's the last slide, but I wanted to show you guys. So check this out. So this is another thing that is important and why I want to emphasize doing astrological research. So I found this book, which you see on your screen, in Kreuzberg, Germany, in Berlin. And I was like, oh, look, €5. It's a book about astrology. I'll get it. And I'm looking at the inside. And it's like, oh, 1937. Okay, cool. And then I was like, wait, 1937, fourth edition, 70,000 copies. Wait, why don't I see if there's a first edition, which I see here? And I'm like, okay. And then I read both of them line by line. And I don't know if you guys know what happened in Germany between 1922 and 1937, but I mean, look at the graphic design for one thing, and there are things missing from this book. So I like to collect the various editions of the books to make sure that I can figure out, like, okay, what got deleted? Because if we say, oh, this person's saying this about astrology, it's like, yeah, but they're saying it during a fascist dictatorship. Like, what did they say about it before the fascists took over, you know? So we have to do that kind of comparative research. It's really important. And so this, you know, meeting Oscar Schmitz's ideas really put it into my mind, like how critical it is to think about the sources, like the specific printings of the sources that you're working with. And not to mention, before he met Jung, he has an entire half of this book about astrological psychology in 1922. So he started writing it in 1917 during the war, had this huge, like, you know, battle within himself of being somebody who was like not wanting to go to the front. So he defected to Austria and hid in a little like salon for 4 years or whatever, and then comes out with this book where he's talking about astrological psychology. And he frames this like I want to say Rolf Tawkins because I don't know how to say Siak Libra, but he's like, this is an astrological travelogue. I'm not going to do technical stuff. I'm just going to show you how astrology can be cool. And it's a narrative just kind of bringing you through, just being like, oh yeah, you can do this with astrology and that with astrology. And oh, you can do psychological astrology too, right? So I think it's important. 1922, pre-Jung, psychological astrology, astropsychology, for real. And then the funny thing, the last thing I want to do. Do you see this? I'm going to stop sharing, but I'll show you this thing. It's so cool. So
wow.
this is a perfection clock created in some long time ago.
That's
So you can just take a dial and just
Isn't
like,
that something?
and then, you know, if you see on the insides, you kind of do little, like, I never can count, you know, so like they have it all counting like that. So.
And when was this
then
created?
This one, 1933.
Wow.
Amazing. That's great.
Perfections. So yeah. And you can see like the graphic design of things when they shift, you know, like theosophical, not theosophical, theosophical, not theosophical. So yeah, there's a lot more interesting stuff about Germany than Jung and Hitler. And I'm
Absolutely.
done.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Fascinating.
What a brilliant presentation. I love the infused humor as well. Absolutely great. All the hearts coming up. Absolutely wonderful. Quick questions actually we had coming through. So
Okay.
the earlier texts you were talking about, are any of them, which ones are translated from German to English?
Oh, that's a hard question. Not many. I'll say that.
Okay.
Not many. I'm in the process of translating some of them, but I've actually just discovered that there's some AI bots crawling, trying to translate all of them. So it's weird. You know, we live in a strange time.
Indeed, we do.
Well, thank you, Jen, so much. And thank you, Inga. Wonderful presentations. Fantastic.